event. And yeah, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks so much. So as mentioned, we already have our next speaker online. So Victor Caritte is a manager at Deloitte Sustainability Services, and he will talk about business and climate change. So we shift to the business perspective, and he will be telling us about how business can shift from efficiency to sufficiency. So we are very much looking forward to your talk, Victor. Welcome.
Very much. Can you hear me well?
Maybe if you can speak a bit louder, at least from my side.
I can speak a little bit louder indeed. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I did not have the chance to listen the entire of the previous talk, but I think that we were pretty much on the same page, that we do need indeed more behavioral change if we are to see global carbon emissions change. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm a manager at Deloitte, France. I've been working for 7 years at the Paris office. I got an engineering background, and I'll let you know to what extent this made me have this thinking now that I will share with you. So to start with, I won't be too long, but just a quick reminder on the climate emergency. I'm sure most of you are aware about. The curve on the left-hand side is historical CO2 emission at the world level. And if we are to meet the Paris Agreement, we now have to decrease global carbon emissions very quickly. If we had started back in 1995 to reduce global carbon emissions, we will have followed quite a smooth curve. But this is not what we did. Global emissions have kept on increasing, and we are now at the very top of a curve. So I think this graph is quite important for people to understand that why are we talking about an emergency? That's because the kind of path we are to follow at the global level are challenging, more than challenging, maybe impossible. So this is just to give you a flavor of what the science tells us to do. And at Deloitte, we believe that companies have a key role to play. You know, companies don't emit CO2 just because they are happy of it. They emit CO2 to sustain some economic activities or very needs. But they do have a lot of levers, a lot of action potentials that is important for them to take. That is why we believe it's an important target to address. So that's all for the climate emergency. And but before going into sorry, I didn't give you an overview of what I was about to say today. So first, yes, a climate emergency. Then I'm gonna tell you a few things about a great report which was released previous summer called Decoupling Debunked. You'll see it's a great piece of science to help you maybe shape your thinking about this transition. Third item is the consequences of the thinking for business. And fourth item is a concrete example, because I guess all of you have to go into concrete projects now. A concrete example of a corporate mobility sufficiency program I've led at Deloitte France called Shift and Go. So I won't talk too much about theory, hopefully, and I'll get into this level of details soon enough. But to start with, this report called Decoupling Debunked. What this report is all about is looking at, is it possible to have the size of the physical economy growing whilst seeing a decrease in impact in environmental impacts in absolute value, because that's really the basis for most political agendas. That's the basis for many corporate agendas. Page 1 of the report, the company says, I'm going to keep on growing. Page 2, the same company says, I'm going to see my greenhouse gas emissions reducing fast. Same goes for policymakers. The thing is, that's an assumption, interesting assumption, an interesting theory, but what this report said after a thorough review of the literature is that decoupling is just not happening globally and at any significant scale. Just to let you visualize what it means, on the graph on the right-hand side, we did calculate global energy consumption and global GDP. What you can see on this graph is that these two variables are very, very much correlated, and that we are not seeing globally a decoupling of these two values. So this is what they said, which wasn't so new, but it's the very first macro study looking at all the literature on this topic. What is new in their thinking is that they also say that decoupling is unlikely to ever happen. Why? They do mention 7 reasons, which are here. I'm not going to go through all of them. Just maybe the 2 first. So the first one is rising energy expenditures. That's something well known in economy. It's a fact that whenever you want to go for a resource, you're going to start with the low-hanging fruits, and that the more it goes, the more difficult it becomes to get the resource out of the ground. The second item is problem shifting, and a good example are electric cars, which indeed reduce pollution locally, but induce upstream and downstream emissions. And many other effects and many other reasons which are very interesting. Just to show you an example of item 1, rising energy expenditures. Back in the good old days in the USA or in Saudi Arabia, when we're talking about conventional oil, oil which is very easy to get, you just drill a hole in the ground and oil basically spills out. Back at those days, we had to invest 1 barrel of oil to get 100 barrel out, because it was just very easy to get this petrol. Nowadays, in the new non-conventional oil fields, such as offshore, deep offshore, and tar sands, you can see there, we are to invest 1 barrel of oil to get only 5 back. This is called the energy return on energy invested KPI. So as we could have expected, this KPI is getting worse and worse despite technological improvements, and at one point it will stop. At one point we will stop looking for oil if we need to invest 1 barrel for only having 1 back. So that's a concrete example of rising energy expenditures, and one of the reasons why we might never see a decoupling of global economic growth and environmental impact. That's also another way to see it. I think it's important for all of you to understand that 85% of the world energy supply is based on fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are everywhere. I did a master at Imperial College back in 2012. The name of the master was Sustainable Energy Futures, and we were looking at 2020 with a star in the eyes, thinking, yeah, we will have done the energy transition by then. The thing is, yes, we are putting additional solar, additional wind, additional renewables, but it's just additional power. It doesn't replace the intake of oil, coal, gas. We have never extracted as much oil, coal, gas as we did in 2019. So the transition is not happening, and it's important to understand why. And this is what I will try to explain in short. Just yes, the picture on the right is here to let you understand that everything we basically do in our life, somehow at one point there are fossil fuels involved, directly or indirectly. So what the decoupling report is saying, so it's a report for policymakers, and what this report says is that policymakers should stop prioritize efficiency measures and be looking at sufficiency measures. What it means, to be very clear, is if we take the example of the performance of a building, we shall invest more resource trying to have people reduce the heating temperature rather than trying to build renewable energy or better isolate a building. The reason is that in push sufficiency measures are the only one which can give overnight results and which has the potential to reduce our consumption and our impact as needed. Another example, which is very much connected to COVID-19, yes, the airline industry has been putting billions and billions increasing performance of planes, and that's great, that's important, but overall the absolute impact of the aviation industry keeps on increasing. Overnight we had a sanitary crisis called the coronavirus, right? And planes stayed on the ground overnight, and overnight the impact of the aviation industry went from a 2% global emissions to 0. So that's the kind of change which can come with efficiency measures, where we decide maybe to travel less or to travel differently, for instance. So that's for this political level and scientific level discourse. What we're trying to do at Deloitte is to translate this for business, so that they really help this transition to happen. So that's another view of the graph I was showing previously. It shows per sector what are the global CO2 emissions in 2020. That's a projection from the IPCC. And on the second bars are for 2050. That's the carbon budget we have if we are to follow the Paris Agreement. That means that global emissions are to be divided by about 6, which means a yearly reduction of about 6 to 8% year on year. So we will achieve this target for 2020 because of this sanitary situation, but it just shows you how difficult it is to see such a decrease happening this fast. So global emissions have to decrease fast in a so it's a huge amplitude over a very short period of time, and we have limited resources to do this transition. What it means is that we believe an inevitable policy scenario. We believe that business should be ready for that. The fact that the economy cannot be as big as we want in a carbon neutral world. Any activity cannot sustain in a low carbon world, and that's quite a new thinking. We have been growing up in this liberty, this freedom of entrepreneurship, and yeah, let's keep it on. But we are to acknowledge that we can do whatever we want as far as it's within the planet boundaries, right? So that somehow some business activities will have to reduce in size. So that is what we are saying to business, and that if a business is to be successful in the years to come, they are to understand which role they could play in a carbon neutral world, how they could transform to fit in this new area. So we have developed this compass for business to achieve resilience. What it means is that companies should, if you don't know where to start, decrease your greenhouse gas emissions in line with what is expected from science. This will transform your business towards a safer zone. Transform your business to have more value to the society and to the environment. And eventually, climate change is not only a risk, it's already a reality. And companies are to think the continuity of their assets to the physical impacts of climate change. Here, just to illustrate what can mean transformation. On the right-hand side, you can see the 17, what is the name again in English? The SDGs, yes, from the UN. And you know, the UN usually displays all 17 SDGs on just one plan graph. That's a work done by the Stockholm Resilience Center, where they said actually 4 of them do refer to the biosphere, 8 of them refer to the society, 4 of them refer to the economy. And actually there is some sense of priority, because there won't be any economy if there is no society. There won't be any society if there is no biosphere. To put it simple, there is no business to be done on a dead planet, right? So companies should think about the values they provide to the biosphere and to society before thinking about the economical value. To put it simply, you know, if I am a provider of water to a city, I'm much more luckier to sustain that if I'm I don't know, providing a high carbon leisure for people. So that's just, yeah, so some preliminary thinking. And now to go into a concrete example of what could be a sufficiency program that transforms operation in the way I was telling before. So Shift and Go is the name of a program I'm leading at Deloitte France. It's a 1-year-old program now, which had started a preview before COVID-19. What the problem we address is the increase of CO2 emission related to business travels. Why did I take this fight of business travels? That's that's because in my is a job I do in professional services and consulting. Business travels is about 90% of our carbon footprint. So, you know, we were trying to do something meaningful, just like the previous talk said. And so yes, so that's the biggest area of improvement for our business, and global carbon emissions related to business travels are increasing about 5% a year globally. It's a financial cost, significant cost for the economy, and the current COVID situation shows us how dangerous it is for the operations and business models to be so reliant on unlimited travel of people and goods around the world. So Shift and Go, it's a transformation program of behaviors and operations and technological solutions that I won't explain too much here, but about the transformation program of behaviors. Well, I'll go into details in just a second, but so the promise we make is cutting CO2 emissions a lot thanks to a radical program. Radical because it looks at the very roots of the problem. We're going to reduce the need for traveling. It saves money without any investment. It attracts and retains talents, and companies are very sensitive to that at the moment about the workforce and their expectation for the work they're going to do. And it transforms operation, as I was saying earlier, and therefore future-proof businesses. So about the transformation program, that's just maybe some inspiration for you all. So we need to have behaviors changed because we had a culture of traveling which has deep in the roots of my company. And so what we needed here is to have some commitment from the top, is having our top boss saying, well, we're going to do something, we're going to have decarbonization targets. creating conviction. And here we are using the climate collage, which is a very efficient workshops to really drive impact and to have people feel engaged into this conversation. Then driving execution, as I said, we are transforming operations and locking changes. To do so, what we actually do is, with decision trees, root cause trees, trying to understand, why did we travel? Well, why do we need to travel? And soon we realized that we had margins for improvements, and I could be very specific if you wanted to, but we are changing the way we approach our engagement with clients to reduce the need for traveling, which means when we are doing data testing, for instance, we are auditing works, we are stopping going on sites all over the world, but only doing consolidation reviews. That's just an example of how we reduced the need for traveling. We sell it to clients. That's very important in the business area to show that this kind of programs is client oriented. And it's something energized by it's really bottom-up program with influencers, people such as me in many different service lines, which want to make these colleagues change. And it's also something very gamified with, we are playing on this bias of people comparing one to another and social value. Yeah, I won't go into the details of this slide, but just to show you that the program has been working, reducing carbon emissions 15%, well, 14% in our team over last year, before COVID. And that's just a few samples of, to be more concrete again, of these workshops I was talking to you about called the Climate Collage. I really encourage you to look into this. I've been working for 7 years in sustainability, and really that's the best tool I have in hand to have people commit to the change. It's 42 cards over on a big table, and it's a 3-hour workshops where people do trace the link between the different elements of climate change. So it's very well, you learn a lot. I learned a lot when I did this first, and it's really well designed to have people feel physically commit in the game and get out of this with a much more acute sense of urgency and of action. So a great tool we are using to have people commit to the program. Just an example of, as I said, it's gamified. So we have a logo with a snail on a skateboard and fact sheets, to give actual data to the people about the impact of traveling. Yeah, as I said, gamification. So here, so whenever someone reduces or manages not to travel compared to a baseline situation, he can put a little ball into a tower whenever the tower is full. Our partner is offering a pint of beer to everyone in a pub to celebrate shifters, the active shifters of the month. So, even if a very serious corporate teams, that's what we do. And that's important to have a change happening. And finally, yeah, this slide is way too busy, but just to show you how that's concrete procedures implemented in our work to reduce the need for traveling, having people go through decision tree before they eventually travel. So that's all for me. I'm happy to take any question you might have about my presentation and more.
Thank you, Victor. Very nice presentation. Thanks so much for this. There is actually some conversation, some discussion generated on the YouTube comments. So I will maybe read to you a couple of the questions that we have. So one is quite technical, or at least very tough. So someone is asking, what are the implications of this decoupling between of this degrowth that you were talking of? So decoupling the economic system from the environmental one for the global financial system. And so what are the implications on sovereign debt, for example? So should all sovereign debt be cancelled, or how would that work?
Sorry, can you repeat the end of your question? Just the end.
So what are the implications on the global financial system and on sovereign debt?
Oh yeah.
And should all debt be cancelled because we decide to go in another direction?
Indeed, it's probably a mess because the economic system based on debts it's supposed to keep on growing if we are to ever reimburse our debt. Sorry. So if we say that we're gonna follow the Paris Agreement, which means less economic activities, yes, it's gonna be a terrible mess. So I don't know. I'm not an economic expert, unfortunately, but yeah, it's quite. My grandpa sometimes tells me, Victor, I'm very sorry, we're leaving you with a huge debt of money in France. I say, yeah, I know, but I don't care. I'm quite sure that just because the physical world is getting constrained, whatever, even if we are not to follow the Paris Agreement, I think that other factors will have us hit the limits, the planet boundaries, and that the economic activities will reduce in size whatever we want. Yeah, we will not reimburse this debt, but at the end of the day, I'm much more concerned about the physical world, like greenhouse gas emissions, water supply, etc. And yeah, this economic financial world is important. It's important to understand, but doesn't feed you, doesn't make you breathe. So I'm not so much concerned.
No, and I agree with you, obviously, and I think many of our participants today agree that these physical constraints are definitely something that we cannot forget. But maybe another question that is coming up in the discussion is about communication, right? Because and you also talked about this gamifications idea. You also touched upon behavioral change. So someone is asking, in order to actually getting businesses to adapt, policymakers need to start talking in the business languages of profit, losses, and revenues. If we talk if we talk in a different language to businesses, they will just not listen. So you need to readjust to their currencies. So how can we make environmental costs more easy to understand, so that they can be really incorporated in the current mindset? So what's the key there?
Well, if I had the answer.
But because you mentioned that in one of the slides you showed that the first action is actually going to the top managers and having them commit to some action. So once you reach out to these top managers, what do you tell them? I think that's one of the.
I think what is actually driving a lot of corporate actions nowadays is not money. I think it's much more young people, children of executives, who tell them, daddy or mommy sometimes, I'm afraid, I think it has been driving a lot of change lately in the past few years, only in the past few years, more and more, because yeah, I mean, I know it's important to well, based on my experience, I've been quite successful lately, having a very not putting any lipstick on the pig, if you see what I mean. A very frank discourse, that's the science, that's where we're going. It's gonna be a disaster. You need to change now. I don't know why, but it has been a little bit, it has been working better over the past few months and years. Maybe because we are all witnessing the physical impacts of climate change, and here another crisis, the coronavirus. But I think that in many minds, this religion of eternal economic growth is tending to get shaked out. So my recommendation for you is indeed, do try to make this change happening with all the people in the room. I think when I said it's important to have commitment from the top, is that whenever a guy like me or whoever in a company want to make change happening, it's not going to work if I'm the only one, saying, yeah, I want to shift and go, let's stop traveling. You have to have at one point, at the beginning at least, the head of the company saying, yes, this is what we are going to do, because you're just going to get destroyed at the very beginning, because you're just a small root, grass, whatever. And after a while, you are growing up, and people understand that that's the way to go, and then you don't need maybe so much commitment from the top. But at the beginning, I think it's quite important for the kind of initiative to start with. And I'm not this kind of person, saying you shall work for this company. These companies are bad guys. Don't start. I think we should try with everyone to have this change happening. But if you understand that people in front of you are not willing to change, they are in a defense mode, of defending their current business, their current license to operate, and not willing to address tough questions, well, you better maybe move on to another stakeholder. But I think there are great things to do in many places with many people.
Thank you for your encouragement, and I hope the participants are picking up on many of your recommendations, that they will try to find ideas like the one that you mentioned at the end, maybe. So very pragmatic and simple ideas, but that can actually make people start changing towards something different. So thank you so much. You're welcome to remain connected if you want to listen to the next talks or participate to the discussion. But we are having a slight delay. I think it's 15 minutes is still very reasonable, but we will shift to our next speaker, who is already connected.